everyone. This is our second lecture in week 4. Today we'll be talking about values and norms. This is our agenda for the day. We're going to be talking about first values, and there are a whole lot of definitions associated with that, which are also listed in your book. And then we will also be talking about subcultures and phenomena related to subcultures in this lecture. So, values are kind of where we start with this cluster of definitions, and these are all pretty much interrelated. Values are shared beliefs about what a group considers worthwhile or desirable. These guide the creation of norms. So we start with values. So, for example, our society values human life. In general, we value nonviolence. In general. Coming out of those values, we develop norms. Norms are the formal and informal rules regarding what kinds of behavior are acceptable and appropriate within a given culture. Using our example of valuing nonviolence, our society develops the norm of you shouldn't fight with other people physically. You shouldn't kill other people. So we have the value of valuing human life and the norm of don't murder people or don't physically fight with people. Norms are specific to given cultures, time periods, and situations. So there certainly have been cultures different than ours that have placed less of a value on human life. There have been cultures different than ours that have placed more value on human life. Situation. Human life in a war zone, which is a different situation, is lessened. And to go along, norms can be either formal, such as a law, or informal, or unspoken. And we'll talk about this in a moment. So a law is a type of norm that has been written down and is officially recognized. So examples of laws are exactly what you would think of. It is written down by the legislator that is against the law to murder other people. And typically, laws are the more severe norms in our society, the things we place greater emphasis on. Not always, but usually. A folkway, then, is a loosely enforced norm that involves common customs, practices, or procedures that ensure or attempt to ensure smooth social interaction and acceptance. So folkways are usually fall in the category of good manners, right? So you're not going to the burp in the face of somebody else. That is a folkway. You're going to maintain a certain distance between other people. When you just meet a new person, you're not going to stand like an inch away from their face and talk at them, right? That is a folkway associated with body space. A moray, then, said moray, not more. A moray is a norm that carries greater moral significance and is closely related to the core values of a group. This is often involves severe repercussions for violators. So that norm against killing people, I'm sorry, the value against killing people that leads to the norm don't murder people is also a moray against not murdering people, because a moray is a very, very strong norm. A law, then, is most mores then are laws that I mentioned a moment ago. But it's important to note, and this is a kind of an artifact from previous semesters. A couple, I believe it was a year ago, as of this recording anyway, Ohio had a election to make recreational marijuana legal. And that kind of election, that kind of asking, is this thing we think is bad, but Is it bad or good? We don't know, but there's definitely a law against it. That's the kind of social change and social dynamic that societies go through. A taboo, then, is a norm. Taboos are also mores, so they're those strong types of norms that is so deeply ingrained in us. It is such a strong more that just thinking about it evokes feelings of disgust, horror, or revulsion in most people. Many of our taboos are sexually related. So, incest is a good example of a taboo. It makes us feel physically ill or physically uncomfortable to think about people who have had sex with their brothers and sisters, for example. Cannibalism is another example of a taboo. We feel uncomfortable when people talk about eating other people. Necrophilia, sex with corpses. So that is another thing that is taboo. Next set of concepts. A sanction is either positive or negative. So these are positive or negative reactions to the ways that people follow or disobey norms. These include rewards for conformity and punishment for norm violators. So if you hold a door open for an old lady, because we have a folkway that says hold doors open for people who can't hold doors open for themselves, the old lady might say thank you. That is a positive sanction. If you kill somebody and violate that violate that law, we will impose upon you a negative sanction of either put you in prison or execute you. Sanctions help to establish social control. Social control are the formal and informal mechanisms used to increase conformity to values and norms and thus increase social cohesion. So we have sanctions to try to control the population. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of times when we talk about social control, people talk about, I'm sorry about that. Oh, the government's trying to control us in this way and that way and this way and that way. But, we need a degree of social control so that, people cross at crosswalks at the right spots and don't drive down the highway 120 miles an hour, right? This is how society maintains itself. Now let's talk about dominant cultures, subcultures, and countercultures. The first definition we have is dominant culture. The dominant culture refers to the values, norms, and practices of the group within society that is the most powerful in terms of wealth, prestige, status, and influence. The dominant culture is sometimes hard to identify because their cultural items are often considered everyone's cultural items, right? So in American, elements of the dominant culture might be a big house, a nice car, eating apple pie, going to baseball games. These are all elements of American culture, sure, but these things have been shaped by the dominant culture. So the people that control society are rich, old, white men, right? People of European descent. Rich people can buy big houses. That's what we all aspire to. Apple pie has European Germanic origins, right? And we consider it kind of an American thing, but it comes out of European cuisine. This is, and it's incredibly interesting stuff, and I'd love to talk about it more, but that's the time we have right now. It's the flaw of Sociology 101. A subculture, then, is a group within society that is differentiated by its distinctive values, norms, and lifestyle. So a subculture is a group that has different aesthetics, different cultural sets of things. They're just a little bit different than the dominant culture. So we see a group of goth people that have their specific musical aesthetic, a specific visual aesthetic, fashion aesthetic, and that is a subculture. But similarly, we have the Detroit Red Wings that have, it's a hockey team. Associated with that hockey team is its own aesthetic. The jerseys, certain practices associated with that team. For example, when they score a hat trick, which is when the same person scores 3 goals in one game. Many teams within the NHL, they throw hats onto the ice. That's what's called a hat trick. In Detroit, they throw a squid onto the ice. That is part of their subculture. This is not to be confused with a counterculture. A subculture has its distinct elements, its distinct cultural ideas, but a counterculture also has distinct cultural ideas, but actively rejects and or opposes society's norms and values. So a subculture coexists with the dominant culture. A counterculture attempts to overthrow either the entire dominant culture or an element of the dominant culture. It's important to note, though, and this is why I use these old pictures, that countercultures ebb and flow with time. We see pictures of members of the Ku Klux Klan, and those people in the Southeast, when they first developed, were part of the dominant culture. But as our society has increasingly rejected racism, they have become a counterculture. Similarly, we see anti-Vietnam War protesters in the mid 1960s that were once very countercultural because society agreed in the mid 60s that war with a communist power was a good thing. And then as time went on, the society decided that it was a bad thing. And now most people in our society see Vietnam as being a war that wasn't worth it. And so thus those anti-Vietnam countercultural protesters have become part of the dominant or accepted culture. So, a note on cultures. Cultures usually change slowly and incrementally, though change can also happen very rapidly and in dramatic ways. So, most social change, most culture happens slowly, but sometimes it happens very, very quickly for a variety of reasons. It might be a catastrophe, it might be a catastrophic terrorist event, it might be, it just might it could be almost anything, but it usually happens slowly. And at times, as I noted, a subculture can influence the mainstream and become part of the dominant culture, or something that is dominant can change to a counterculture, as the example with the Ku Klux Klan. Here's an example of cultural change. You may, depending on your point of reference, recognize this. This is a frame from the propaganda piece from the 1930s, Reefer Madness, where people in the dominant culture were trying to convince people, particularly parents, that their kids were going to become drug addicts because they were using marijuana. I believe Reefer Madness is probably on YouTube now. It's funny in spots, but it's actually kind of a dreadful movie. It's just really slow. But what you're seeing there in front of you is a wild party by that movie standards. And that guy sitting in the background by the bookcase, there's the drug dealer. These are not cultural elements that we would associate with drug use or even a wild party. Um, the lady in the foreground with her arms up in the air is probably the one that looks like she's partying the hardest. And by modern standards, she just kind of looks like a dork. I'm sure she's a very nice, probably old lady at this point. So here's table 3.1, just a reminder that these tables are very useful for study. And our discussion this week, I want you to tell us about a situation where you experienced culture shock. How did you deal with that culture shock? Were you ethnocentric in your initial response, and how were you ethnocentric? Keeping in mind that ethnocentrism happens, we just have to acknowledge it when it happens. Or were you more culturally relativistic? Were you able to pull yourself together and go, you know what, this is just a different kind of thing. So that's cool, and let's deal with it. We also, I don't believe we have a vocab review this week. Sorry, that's a typo. I believe we probably have a short essay this week. Just double check Blackboard to make sure that you get the assignment that's listed. I believe it's a short essay this week, though. Okay, thank you so much for logging in.